Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano, and we are celebrating a milestone. Last week was episode 20, and we thank you. You have heard from former players, coaches, educators, authors, CEOs, and presidents, and so much more, talking about leadership, life, self-awareness, listening, and so much more. Today, episode 21, we have John Tournour, otherwise known as JT the Brick. You hear him on Mad Dog Sports Radio, as well as on the Las Vegas Raiders content platforms. He's been doing that for 25 years. So each and every day, he's talking to leaders, coaches, players, and how they gel together to make championship teams all across the United States. We also today talk about the late Jim Brown. This interview was taped prior to his passing, and JT will tell you about that special relationship that they had. It all begins now with JT. We begin in his college years when he was president of his fraternity.
And once I entered that world, it went from black and white to color. I became part of something special, and I rose up the leadership ranks until I became the president of the Delta Kappa Tau fraternity, and it gave me confidence. It gave me confidence to talk in front of people, have a personality, and interact with people in a large setting. And then it got a little bit crazy because I graduated college with a communications degree, had no idea what I wanted to do. And a buddy of mine in college said, "Hey, you want to be a stockbroker?" And I said, "Well, how do you do that?" He said, "Well, just come down and I'll tell you about it." And it was the scene out of the movie The Boiler Room, the exact movie, the same guys, the guys who wrote the movie The Boiler Room. And Chris, did you ever see that movie or Wolf of Wall Street?
Yes, I've seen both those movies. I love both those movies. They're very interesting. So your visualization, I'm with you. Continue. This is fantastic.
Yeah, so I got into that world. So I got into that world of stockbrokering, cold calling, got my Series 7, Series 63, and then I got pretty much thrown into a boiler room, a company called Sherwood Capital that became JT Moran. In the movie, it was JT Marlin. And
Right.
I was a cold call cowboy. I got on the phone with the yellow pages in front of me, opened it up, went to dry cleaners, car washes, and just started cold calling. And I'd make 300 cold calls a day. And every month I'd try to open up 10 accounts, and I'd get in my car and I'd go visit strangers. And I'd get in front of them and try to get them to give me money to invest in low price stocks. We weren't talking IBM at the time. We weren't talking about blue chips here, just trying to open up accounts and start relationships. And then that was a big chapter because that taught me how to be a salesman, period. How to cold call, how to close, cold call, and work 16, 17 hours a day, which really became my moniker. So I did that. I bought a Porsche. I made a lot of money. I'm 21 years old. I'm making over 100 grand. My dad's looking at the paychecks and just like the movie going, "This isn't right. I don't know how you're making this money, but this is crazy." And I did that for about 4 or 5 years until I physically and mentally hit a wall because, number one, it probably wasn't the right way to build an investment career. I worked till overdrive. There was a lot of partying and nightlife and getting up and banging the phones again in the morning. So then I decided with my best friend I had enough and I wanted to do it the right way. So we both moved out west, said goodbye to my family. Hardest goodbye I've ever had in my life, saying goodbye to my mom and dad. Got in a van with my buddy. We traveled west to San Diego, got hired by Smith Barney, went the right way, did that for a few years. And when I was out there, I started to listen to sports radio. I'd be in my Porsche and I'd be sitting on a sunset cliff and I'd be watching the sunset or during lunch having a sandwich and I'd be listening to sports radio. Something I didn't do a lot in New York because I was too busy working. And I fell in love with sports radio, and then I started calling in. And I started to call into sports talk shows, Jim Rome show, guy by the name of Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, and that became my passion in life. I said, wow, I'm damn good at this. I know sports. I know the Knicks. I know baseball. I'm watching Tony Gwynn play for the Padres. And then people started to know me on the radio. Longer story short, I entered the Jim Rome Smack Off. Jim Rome has a syndicated show. He decides to have a caller-only contest, invite only, for the best callers on his show, and I entered it with the intention of winning, and I won it. And if I did not win that contest, I would have never met you. I would have never met my wife. I would have never met Andrew Ashwood, who I wrote my book, The Handoff. and I wouldn't be on the radio. So that was the big move in my life, winning that contest and getting into sports media.
Wow, what a story, JT. What an origin story, for goodness sakes. You come from the East Coast. I want to touch on something that you said. You had a passion for sports and talking about sports. Rome let you on. You had the smack off. You win. You start this career. But something you said that I don't want to brush over, and maybe somebody that's listening to this might not have noticed this the way I did, but I have to. You said it was the toughest goodbye to say goodbye to your family, to leave the East Coast and come out West. But you have remained very close to your family. How did you bridge that gap and remain close to everybody? Because this podcast, what we're talking about is relationships and how we stay involved and stay connected to people, because that's what, life is all about, and that's what we're trying to do here. But how did you do it with your family, sisters, and your mom and dad?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, that's something that I can never put my finger on it. The one thing I think I've been great at my entire life, not good at, great at, is keeping in touch with my friends. Now, I wasn't the greatest brother. I wasn't the greatest son. I've had flaws like everybody does, but I always kept in touch with my friends. I was always the guy, and still am, the first one to pick up the phone. I have a list in my mind every day of who I need to call for energy, who I need to call for spiritual karma advice, who I need to just check in with because maybe they're not doing great. And I know that and I feel that. So, I kept in touch, and it really is a deep, deep dive into probably the biggest guilt that I have in my life. With the success that I've had, whatever level that is, I haven't been able to share it with my family because my family's on the other side of the country. So, of course, my dad will hear an interview. He'll hear me interview the head coach and see it with the Raiders. He'll listen to a podcast of mine from time to time, but I'm not in his life every day. My brother-in-laws are. My sisters are, my nieces and nephews are back east, and I try to bring my kids into that life as much as possible. But, to give you that answer, I think it's just part of my DNA. My DNA was the small group of guys that I had in high school, which very lucky. I'm still in touch, Chris, with the 12 or 13 guys that I was in first grade with, that we went to the prom together, that we graduated with. They're still my friends, many of them my best friends. And we're on a thread together. And then when I went to Geneseo in the fraternity, I still go back. I went to the 150th reunion of my fraternity and saw everybody and said goodbye to some guys who were in their 90s I'd never see again, and met kids who were 18 who were pledging the fraternity. And I'm a storyteller on the radio, and I like to tell those stories. But saying goodbye has always been tough. Keeping in touch has never been a problem. And what we're seeing now and sharing after COVID, post-COVID, is we're at a time now where people can't travel as easy. It's hard. It's expensive. Flights are canceled. It's not as easy to go jump on a plane on a Thursday and get back on time Sunday to do a radio show. But I work hard to do it because family is the most important thing. And friendship at times has gotten in the way of my family because I love my friends a lot too. So, hey man, it's a good place to be in when you have a great family and you have a lot of friends. I consider you one. I just try to keep in touch with everybody as much as I can.
Well said. Now, JT, let's transition, if we can, to great leaders, people you have seen, people you and I have talked about in the sports world or otherwise. JT, what embodies a great leader? And then give me a couple examples, please.
Well, I think the biggest thing, Chris, is the ability to communicate. I don't care how you are as a leader. You could be the president of the United States. You could be a leader of a film company. You could be the leader of a sports team. You have to communicate. You could have all the examples and the skill set of how to do it. There are silent leaders who just perform. Like Derek Jeter, good example, great baseball player. He goes out there, he performs. He doesn't talk a lot. You don't hear a lot about the rah-rah Derek Jeter, but he showed everybody how to do it. And that's what leadership's about. Either you're showing people by your strengths and your gifts, and they can see that you're leading from a high level and you're an example to everyone, or you might be that type of leader inside and you have to get it out and you have to communicate it and you have to tell people. And it's unfortunate because there's some leaders who are better than others that just do a better job of telling stories and getting people from point A to point B. So I would say that example, lead by example. We've heard that for decades, for hundreds of years. Show people how to do it. Lead them uphill in a battle. Be the first through the door. If you're a police officer or if you're a leader in your company, show everybody that you can lead in sales and revenue every month and do it the right way the way with a purpose. But you got to be able to share those stories. And that's why I'm happy to be on your podcast and talk about leadership, because great leaders jump to the front of the line and they bring people with them. I had a mentor named Andrew Ashwood. I wrote a book about the handoff, and he was a great leader, and he was a executive in radio, and he was one of my best friends, and he became my boss. And one of the things that was great about this relationship was he was able to talk to me like a best friend, and I was able to talk to him like a best friend. But then when he took over as my boss, we lost that leadership, and I lost that friendship because he had to become my boss, and we had some friction. And when he got diagnosed with terminal cancer, he came to me. And you want to talk about a leadership moment in my life. I thought my friendship was over with him. He was my boss. We weren't talking anymore. He went and got married and didn't invite me to his wedding. I thought I was going to be the best man in his wedding. And he probably just needed a break from me because I was giving him friction. And he came back from his honeymoon and he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he pretty much knew that he had the fight of his life in front of me. And he looked at me and he said, I need you right now to drop everything and help me on this journey. And at that moment, I dropped everything. We didn't talk about our bad issues or bad blood at the time. Everything stopped because he was a leader. I was a leader. He picked me because he knew I could help him on chemo trips and this chemo journey. And that was a leadership moment in my life that I was very proud of, because someone asked me to do something in a leadership capacity. I had to put my wife and my young kids on hold, my parents on hold, my job on hold, and try to help my friend who was battling the fight of his life. So leadership can come in many different forms. But when you're asked to lead and you're put in a position, you better be prepared to do it.
So you just bring up a great attribute there, and thank you very much for sharing that story. You have shared that with me. In fact, I was with you when we went to a tribute for Andrew in the mid-2000s in Green Bay. I don't know if you remember that. I'm
yes,
sure you
do. Yes, I do. Special night.
Yes, it was. So thank you for including me. But JT, I'll say this. What you just exhibited right there for yourself was selfless leadership. You know, you probably said to your wife and your two boys, hey, they were pretty young at the time, if even they were born, but you probably had to say, this is important. I need to be a friend here. And that is a form of self-leadership, JT. Andrew, I am sure appreciated that. What were those conversations like as he was fighting the battle of his life?
Well, that was another important part of leadership too, was listening. You know, that's probably the point in my life where I became a really intent listener. You know, my wife will crack me from time to time and say, just like yours, and everyone's partner will say, are you listening? Did you hear what I just said? And you're like, no, yeah, I did, but you didn't. And at that point, I had to listen very closely, and I had to look at body language too. On the days when Andrew was fighting hard during chemo, and he went from a guy who looked like Grizzly Adams with blonde hair, 340 pounds, down to, you know, probably under 200 pounds as he was taking that journey. And I would listen. And then he would ask me. Some days he would say, okay, here's what I need you to do today. I need you to call these 5 people. Just tell them I'm okay. I don't want to talk to them. I can't talk to them today. But you talk to them on behalf of me. And I'd listen to what he'd want me to say. And then I would take that message to the people that he wanted to bring me to. But it was very important just to listen. That's a big attribute with leaders. They have to know how to solve problems, take people to the next level in their careers and in life. And you can't do that if you're bombastic and you don't listen. You know what I do for a living. I do 5 hours of sports radio a day. I'm interviewing 4 to 5 to 6 newsmakers, athletes a day. And I think the one thing that I can say I've done in the last 25 years is I've evolved to be a better listener. People want to listen to the athletes and stars that I have on. My job is to ask the question and get out of the way. And that's the way I try to show some leadership on the radio. Because the rest of the day is just hanging up on callers or listening to callers yell at me. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Yeah.
JT, and listening is a gift. Listening is a gift to the other individual. It also is a hidden gem by way of being an effective leader. Here's why. You get the answers to the test. If you're in a meeting or in an interview and you're doing all the talking, you're not gleaning any information to make the whole experience, either for the listener, the viewer, or in the meeting, the boardroom, or whatever, more enriching for everyone. So you just nailed it. The number one attribute, listening leads to trust and caring. You've got to care. You've got to care about the person you're talking to. Obviously, you cared very much for Andrew. You care very much for your wife, the 2 people that you alluded to. but you also care about your guests on your radio show.
Yeah, and Chris, to say
So
this,
please.
and one part about listening's hard because there are times where you don't want to listen. There are some people in some corporate structures and people that are higher ranked than you and people that are in roles that look to be more leadership roles than you're in, and you're better than them. You know that they're not communicating well. You know that you can do that job, but you have to have respect to listen to people in leadership roles until you get to the point in your career or where you're going on your journey where you can take the mistakes of the person that can't communicate well, learn from those mistakes, and use it for yourself to become a better leader. I mean, talk about how many times you and I and everybody who's viewing and listening to this podcast have been in a situation, a conference, right? You go to a conference and it's 6 hours and you get a break, you get a lunch, you come back for another hour and this, and you're looking at people talking and you say, how did they get there? I can do that. Well, your job is to learn from that and the mistakes of what they're not communicating and tuck it away in the back of your mind and learning to become a better leader and do a better job. Listening is a big part of that. And it took me a long time to do it because I'm a talker. I'm a guy that could interrupt people, stop you in mid-sentence, and want to tell you what I think. But leadership is a great attribute. And the people who are the best leaders I've seen are also the best listeners.
That's right. And just one thing more on listening, then we'll transition here. But not listening to reply, not listening to prove your point, listening to hear what folks are saying, and then form what you're going to say based on that connection you're developing by allowing them to express themselves.
Well, I'll jump in one more thing.
Please.
We're in the social media world now, right? Where you don't want to listen to Twitter, okay? Because I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook and I'm on social media platforms, and you can put something up there and you think it's a really sharp comment. Like you're putting something out there that you think really can give people information. And then you look at the replies and you go, oh my God, what are these people saying? Or that they didn't get what I was thinking at the time. So now, and I'm really happy you're doing what you're doing and you're going to educate so many people, because a lot of times we listen now by looking at our phones. That's the only time we're quiet, when we're not talking on our phones. Unfortunately, we're looking at social media for 4 or 5. Some people are looking at social media, Chris, 6, 7 hours a day. They're quiet. They're listening, they're reading, they're looking, but they're wasting their time. They're in a negative activity. Listening, you want to listen to music. I'm a big rock and roll guy. I go to 8, 10 concerts a year. I mean, I love music and I love sporting events. I go to games. I'm on the sideline of Raider games. I like to hear things. I like to listen. But man, there's sure a lot of people who like to yell over the noise and don't like to listen as much. So.
Right. And, that's a societal thing that we're all going through with the social media and all. But, with the age-old question, what'd you do today? And if you're spending 3 or 4 hours, how are you going to, on social media and just scrolling, what are you going to say? Right? You want to live each day to your maximum ability and get the most out of it. But think in terms of someone was watching you during your day and they're watching you do this.
I've never heard it said that way. That's a really good point you're making out. I've never heard someone say it that way. Never. And that's going to have an effect on me, because I sit here and I'm watching Netflix last night and I'm watching a good show and I'm looking at my phone. I'm looking for the score of the Warriors game at the end of the game. And I can imagine how embarrassed I would be and everybody would be in your bedroom, in the car at a stoplight, or just the amount of time you look at your phone for some type of endorphin. I mean, they've done study on study after this and the impact that it's having on society and kids today. And I can't imagine this. I got 2 kids in college, one at Oklahoma who's a senior, another a sophomore at ASU, and they're supposed to be getting an education. And we're on text threads and we talk a certain way together. That's how we do it. But I think over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be more gadgets invented. The new one's TikTok. There's going to be another edition of that. And if we could all see ourselves, the eye in the sky, looking down on us and watch a video of how many hours a day we're looking at our phone, I think we'd all be ashamed.
Let's transition. You've had so many guests. You've interacted with so many thousands of athletes, coaches, front office executives. When I say, JT, right now, the best leader that you have felt something from over continuous conversations or even one, who comes to mind?
Wow, that's a tough one because there's been many. And when I come to leadership, and maybe the biggest athlete that I've interviewed consistently for a long time is Jim Brown. Jim Brown is probably the most important athlete, one of the most important athletes, top 5 in the history of sports. I'm talking going back to Jim Thorpe, Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, and I have a personal relationship with Jim Brown. And Jim has American, where he tries to raise money to help societal issues, and Jim's got a lot of nonprofits he's involved with. But whenever I talk to Jim privately, there's just an aura around him. He's made many mistakes in his life. He's atoned for it. He's the greatest running back of all time, greatest lacrosse player of all time. But he's a civil rights activist, and he took me into that world. So when we signed him to Fox Sports Radio, and I worked at Fox, I was with Fox for 17 years, and I had a 5-year exclusive with Jim Brown. And the individual Andrew we were talking about, we went to his house, and he basically said, Jim, we'd like to have you on and talk to you once a week during football season. And he said, great. I'll never forget it. He goes, I won't talk sports. And we're like, wow, well, it's kind of a sports radio show. He says, no, I'm not here to talk sports. I want to talk about life. And Andrew got it. He says, oh, that's a beautiful answer. How many guys would have said that? Half the guys would have said, oh, no way. He's not going to talk about the Browns. Well, I said, of course he's going to talk about the Browns. I'll ask him. But he wanted to talk about the war in Iraq at the time. He wanted to talk about civil rights. He wanted to talk about oppression. And that gentleman had such a huge impact on my life, Chris, that he's got to be number one. And all the other head coaches, I've been with the Raiders. This is my 24th year. I've worked with every head coach, and they're all leaders in their right. Fred Biletnikoff, who you know, the Hall of Famer, the College Football Receiver Awards named after him. He's like a second father to me. And my dad, forget about it. My dad's an athlete. He played college ball when I talked to him, but the most recognizable one for your audience would be Jim Brown. And to sum up my relationship with Jim Brown, I don't want to get too emotional here, but I was just back at the Pro Football Hall of Fame as Cliff Branch was inducted, and he passed away a few years ago. And I didn't think I'd see Jim again, because Jim's on the back edge of his life. And all of a sudden, I'm in this unbelievable ballroom with all the Hall of Famers, gold jacket ceremony, after party, and I saw Jim with his wife Monique in the corner. And he wasn't looking good. He wasn't getting around well. And I said, I gotta go talk to him. And in my mind, I was saying, I gotta go say goodbye to him. Because if I never see him again, I want to be able to have that contact with him again. And I sat down and he saw me and there was a glimmer in his eye. I said, Jim, I love you. I want to thank you for everything you've done in my career, all the wisdom you've been able to give me in sports and outside of sports. And he pulled me next to him and he said, I love you too, JT. And when I walked away, the closure I had, and I hope to see him again, and I hope he lives another 10 years, but I prepared myself for that moment. I was ready for it. And I walked away, and there was an aura around me saying, I'm happy I got a chance to do that. Because a lot of us, Chris, don't have a chance to say goodbye and tell our mentors and the people that we care the most about what they mean to us until after they're gone.
That's a very good point. And that's why living your life to the fullest, right? And being authentic and being comfortable as you can be in your own skin. And obviously that takes a lot of work for all of us, but it's so important, JT. You mentioned something about Jim Brown, and I'm so glad you brought him up and what he has done and who he has stood with for causes over the years and the contributions he's made to not just the Cleveland area, but the world in general. JT, you mentioned something interesting about Jim Brown, and I'm sure that you have this with other folks, what they're like in your presence when there's no cameras around or there's no team around. We're off the sidelines. We're in a room, a banquet room, and it's just you two. How do you feel around those folks? And that aura, that level of authenticity that comes across on cameras or in interview rooms or in the boardroom or speaking engagements. JT, talk about that thread of authenticity that needs to be present in a leader, that they're the same when you're with them on the golf course, at dinner, or in front of 17,000 people.
Great question. I'll give you a good example. It just happened this past weekend. Charles Woodson, Hall of Famer, former Packer, Super Bowl champion Raider, Heisman Trophy winner, one of the most impactful football players of all time, from high school state player of the year to the first defensive player to win the Heisman and his Hall of Fame football career. I was with Charles over the weekend at this golf tournament. We spent 2 days together, and some of it was on the golf course, some of it was with my wife at dinner, and then we were out on a patio having a cigar together. And we were sitting down and we were talking, and the small talk was natural. I don't know him great. I'm not in his inner circle, but I respect him. He respects me. And the first thing I said, how are your kids? takes out the phone, shows me his kid scoring a touchdown in a flag football game. JT, how are your kids? Hey, here's my son at ASU. We went to the game last week. And you have that moment with a guy before he's going to get up at this event that I was with him at, where he was going to speak in front of a lot of people. And you have that authentic moment that you're talking about. The most unique leaders are the ones who are authentic, not the one when the light goes on and they turn into, the guest motivational celebrity speaker. It's the guy who could sit down and put out a cigar, finish his drink, and go, I'll be right back. I'm going to go talk to this group of people, and he's the same person. That's Charles Woodson. Authentic, learning about broadcasting. He's on one of the biggest stages. He's on the NFL on Fox. He's at these big events here, but he's the same guy I met when you and I were together, Chris, and he got hired by the Raiders, drafted by the Raiders my first year with the Raiders, 1998. So I knew him when he was a young kid running around Oakland having a lot of fun, and now I'm seeing him with a little gray in his beard, raising money for a foundation, a leader, a high-end leader who's authentic, and he's always in the same rhythm, always in the same mood, and always looking to change people's lives for the better.
And that's a fantastic story. And I got to know Charles a little bit when we were both, the three of us were at the Raiders. I mean, exactly. He wouldn't know me, but he treated me well when we technically worked together at the Raiders. Yeah. So a wonderful individual to bring up. But you brought up something about Charles that I love, a sincere interest he had. You asked him about his kids. He asked you about your kids. And I look back on my career, JT, you and I are almost the same age, and looking back on all these years about wonderful people that we've been around. And I always gravitate towards those people that show interest in me, not me as a person, but the other person in the room, the other person they're engaging with. It's because of the thread of sincerity, JT, and a commitment to being a good person in addition to thriving in their careers, obviously.
Chris, that's very interesting. And that, people are going to take different things out of our conversation. And right. One of the things you're setting me up pretty nicely with these is that I'm trying to be much more conscious of listening and letting other people talk because of the business that I'm in. And I hope this connects with people, because we all have friends. We all have friends who are like this, that they come into a room and it's all about them. They tell you what they did, how much money they made. I just got this car. Me, I. I'm very conscious of that at this stage in my life, because people assume, and I'm no celebrity. I got a couple of radio shows, a couple of podcasts. People see me for the first time and they make a judgment from me, from either Twitter or for what they think, or they hear me. They don't know that at home, as my podcast partner Tom Looney says, I'm a quiet man named John, and then I'm JT on the radio. And I try to remind people, and I try to tell people when I'm around them, that I'm not the guy you heard on the radio. I am. It's just those sports opinions are, but unless you know me, you don't know me. And by letting people talk about themselves, it's something I remind my wife with all the time. I'll nudge her under the table at a restaurant. People start talking, and then they start telling you all about themselves. And then when the conversation comes back to me, maybe because I'm a broadcaster, I'm out of that conversation. Hey, what are you doing now in your life? After listening to someone for 10 minutes say, I bought this car, I went on this vacation, I have this, I got this Rolex, or whatever it is, if it comes back to me, I say, forget about me. Tell me more about you. Or go to the next person who no one's talking to. And that's all a part of listening. But there are a lot of people out there that don't have that gene. And they haven't learned it. And it should be pretty obvious that they're always talking about themselves. And they should listen to what other people have to say. And I've been very conscious about that over the last couple of years. Maybe it has to do with pre and post COVID, where people weren't getting together. Now, when you're getting together with friends and family, you need to listen more.
Wonderful point. And I love that you brought it up. It's an awareness, JT. It's a self-awareness, and I'm by no means being preachy here, but can I just share a story with you on this point? Sure,
please.
So in my leadership journey over the course of these many years, and my evolving and trying to get better, and just always being conscious of who I am as a leader and my failures and things that I've had that have challenged me. But one thing I did one time, JT, is an individual was really good, talented person that reported to me, and he used to write emails, and it was I, and not a bad person, a great individual. I printed one of those emails one day, and I said, rewrite this and don't use the word I. Instead of I and me, go to we and us. and let me see how you shift your thinking a little bit with the initiatives that you're trying to move forward and the way you feel about how that writing that with that mindset feels. He did it. He flourished, and he's one of the most successful people right now that I'm very, very proud of, and it was all him. But that concept right there, JT, to your point about like listening, investing in the other person will get you to where you want to go a heck
Nice.
of a lot faster.
One of the words you said there as you were setting that up is you said failures. You said your failures. That's another big topic and something I talk about on my podcast. Everybody sits there and tears people down with their failures. I'm in an industry right now as a sports broadcaster, a sports talk radio host, where I'm happy where I am today on my 26-year journey, because when I got in, and I told you the story about being a maniac stockbroker, cold caller, all I cared about was getting to the top. All I cared about is, a story in my book, The Handoff, is when I got into sports broadcasting, I had a piece of oak tag, a white piece of oak tag in the apartment that I was living in when I moved to Vegas. And I wrote down the 10 biggest sports broadcasters in my genre, sports radio. Names like Dan Patrick, Chris Russo, Mike and the Mad Dog, Mike North, who's a mentor of mine in Chicago. And then I wrote down who were their agents. I did research to figure out who they were. And I look back on that, which was roughly 25 years ago, and it doesn't matter. At that time, you're so engrossed in getting over and climbing over the next guy and getting the job. I'm at Sports Fan Radio. How do I get to Fox? How do I get to KMBR? How do I get syndicated? I'm on 100 stations. How do I get on 200 or 300? Now I'm at a point in my life where everybody judges you in this industry by either your past success, which I'm happy I have some, and your most recent failure. If you get dropped by a network, if you lose a radio show, if you lose a market. And I'm 56 years old. I don't want to go through that anymore. I want to have peace in my life. I want to do great content every day. I want to do the best shows, the best podcasts, the best coaches interviews I can do. And of course, I want to get to a higher level in my career, make more money and do new things. But I'm not in that rat race anymore. And for all the young people that are watching this, if you're in high school and college, you have to have the mentality to get into the rat race. If you want to be successful, you better work your ass off. You better work, and outwork everybody in the room. I'll tell that to anyone who's young and in college like my sons. And then when you get out there, build your career. But stop along the way and smell the roses. Take those vacations. Take those trips with your buddies. Don't lose contact with your friends on that traditional once-a-year college football trip or NFL trip. Keep doing it, because you want to get to the point in your 40s and 50s and 60s where you could look back and say, man, I had this great career. I mean, I've had so many blessings in my life in sports. I was a month ago on the 50-yard line in front of 60,000 people introducing the 3 Hall of Famers and asking them questions on the sideline of a football game that was sold out. Marcus Allen, Fred Biletnikoff, and Jim Plunkett, all of the MVPs of the Raiders' 3 Super Bowls. And when I walked off the field with Fred Biletnikoff, we walked into the club that was off there. I had a cocktail and I said, man, I appreciate that. It's not going to take me a month to appreciate that. And everybody should get to that point now and not 20, 30, 40 years from now. And I see you going through it. You've had all this success with the Giants, the Raiders, the Jets. You're doing this podcast. You got a great family. You got great friends. Along the way, you're giving people information. You're helping, guiding them, but you're enjoying your life along the way, and you're not forgetting the small things that make life great.
So well put, JT, my goodness. And we've always been a lot alike, and we've had millions of conversations about that. I will tell you, I was the same way, trying to, get through and go to this market, go to that market, go to this market. And I obviously have the good fortune now to teach at NYU. And I tell the students, if I were to tell my 22-year-old self, what would I say? I would say exactly what you just said. Dude, it's all going to be fine. Slow down a little bit, take a deep breath, enjoy the ride. And I know it's hard for people that are ambitious and they don't have the life experience to have the relevancy and the perspective. I was that person. But to your great point, the sooner you can realize that, to go to Europe or do whatever you enjoy as a young person, like go with your friends to this, do that with them. And then, the career will work out. If you work hard, you really underscored that. Working hard, there's no substitute for that. You got to do that. You got to dial it in. You got to know where you're going, and to the best extent that you know what your capabilities and talents are. but enjoy it. Really, really enjoy it, because then you're going to be our age and you
Yeah.
want to look back and have a smile.
Yeah, one more to add to that. I'm working as hard as I've ever worked now, right? I'm doing 2 radio shows a day, and I'm doing some other things, and this will be good to look back on years from now. 3 or 4 months ago, so I'm doing 5 nights a week syndicated radio, and I'm doing 5 days a week of local radio. I'm doing a coach's TV show. I'm doing a podcast, and I'm working all day Sunday on game day for the Raiders. And I got a call from one of my employers, and they were cutting back because they were changing a lineup on one of the platforms. And said to me, hey, instead of doing 5 nights a week, we're going to cut you back to 3 nights a week. And I was kind of for a minute like pissed off and crushed, like, what are you talking about? And they told me why they did it, this athlete lineup change they were doing. And the second I got off the phone with that phone call, I talked to my wife, and my wife looked at me and she said, oh my God, this should be the happiest day of your life. Because you've worked your ass off your whole life, and now you're only talking about 6 hours, right? Wednesday and Thursday night, 3 hours. You're still doing all that other stuff you're doing, and you're worried about 2 nights for a combined 6 hours with all the insanity in your life. And she was right. 2 months later, now it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But I couldn't see the forest through the tree that was standing right in front of me, because my DNA is like, no, not only do I want to do 10 hours of shows a week, I want to do 20, because if I'm doing another one, people are going to think I'm better. And this is something I got from the Jimmy Iovine, Dr. Dre documentary that they did. No one cares. If there's one thing you can take out of this podcast, everybody, from your friend JT, nobody cares. Everybody used to care. What are you driving? The car. What's your job? What's your title? Is it VP of broadcasting? Is it associate VP? Nobody cares. They care about it for about a day. They might troll you on Twitter. They might gossip with their friends and say, man, they're going to have to sell the house because the job isn't what you didn't get the partnership, whatever it was. It lasts a day. People have to put groceries on the table. They got to keep their own jobs. They don't care, but you think they care. Your mind is trained to say, everybody's going to think I lost my job with the Atlanta Falcons. Everybody's going to say, what am I going to do next? Yeah, they're going to say that for about a day. And then the next week, all those people don't even talk about it. They're on to their next job in their life to try to keep the balls juggled in the air. So relax. Take it from a guy who hasn't been relaxed in a business that is a dog race where people are stabbing people in the back to get to the top. Also, they can get an announcement or a blue check mark on Twitter. Nobody cares. They used to care. I think COVID, for another conversation, had a lot to do with it, as we were all sitting around 19, 20 hours a day at home, afraid to go out to the mailbox. Now everybody's coming out, getting fresh air, looking at the world going, who cares what I drive? I don't care what I drive anymore. 20 years ago, I had a Porsche. I wanted a better BMW. Now no one cares. I want to have something that just gets me to and from. Life is a journey. Enjoy the journey. Help people along the way. Mentor people along the way. And thank your mentors who help you go on the journey.
You could not have ended this better, Brick. Those last few words, and you're right. Be there in service of others. Help people, mentor them, take an interest in folks. Help them along the way. Young broadcasters, young leaders, whatever the case may be, do your part. Not to be preaching or whatever, but it's so important to think about others and help them in sharing wisdom. JT, you have exceeded my expectations. You're fantastic. Wow. This was awesome, my friend.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I was looking forward to this call from you, and I can't wait to see it and hear it, and I can't wait to hear your other guest again down the road. And then, the best part about these podcasts is you circle back. You have your friends on, you have me on again down the road, and we review what we talked about. And I'm sure we'll review a couple of elements of our conversation here and see what happens next. But Chris, you've been more than a friend, and I've loved watching your journey because I know you're doing great things. And I know at this stage in your life, you're really excited about what's in front of you and the way you're giving back to others. And thanks for doing it.
And we thank JT very much for being on the show. A couple of takeaways from this week's conversation. Number one, his unique and authentic relationship with the late Jim Brown. We taped that interview, obviously, prior to his passing, but you could hear how much Jim Brown meant to JT. Number two is listening. how important it is for JT in his profession to listen, but also for leaders and anyone who wants to mentor, teach, and be there for someone else. Simply listening before talking or arguing, debating, etc. All right. Many guests have been recommended to me, and they continue to be recommended to me. Now I'm putting it out to you. If you would like to see somebody on this podcast, please let us know in the comments or at my website, garganoleadership.com. We would really appreciate it. And obviously, if you follow, like, or subscribe, we appreciate that as well. For Paul Salazar, our podcast producer, I am Chris Gargano. Have a great week, everybody, and thank you very much.
We thank you for listening to Keep the Line Moving. We would love it if you subscribed or left a review. For more podcast episodes, check out our YouTube page. If you'd like to work with the Gargano Leadership Group, check out our website. This has been a GLG production, copyright 2023. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal. Have a great week, everyone.